This is an amateur film that was made by a surprising group of unfamiliar actors and actresses in Superior Township of Washtenaw County in the summer of 1941. Melvin Schumaker was an entrepreneur who lived in Frains Lake, a small little blip on the map in Superior Township. And he was an amateur photographer, and he had an idea of putting together a motion picture. And so the Frains Lake Players became real, and the name of the movie, Sweet Genevieve, a real melodrama that is silent, of course. There's no soundtrack. But it has the usual romance, and there's a villain in the movie. My father, in fact, is Dick Leslie, who is George Brooks in the film, and uncharacteristically, my father was everything in this movie that he really wasn't in real life. Thank God, I guess. But anyway, I digress. Getting back to the film itself, it starts out in Ypsilanti, and you'll see some scenes from Ypsilanti that some of you who are familiar with that town will recognize. For instance, this scene right here is at the employment office, which was actually the employment office in Ypsilanti at the time. And Sweet Genevieve is unfortunately out of work. And it doesn't look terribly encouraging that she's going to find a job anytime soon. So this is somewhat of the conundrum that she finds herself. Helen Litke Hermans is the woman who plays Sweet Genevieve. She was from Frains Lake. But as I said, talking to my dad, who was a principal in the film, he did not know her before the film was made. Here she is crossing a bridge in Ypsilanti that is still there, I believe. And this home is on a side street in Ypsilanti. And Sweet Genevieve is coming back to where she rents a room, somewhat disappointed and certainly very discouraged that she hasn't been able to find a job. Her daughter in this movie is, in real life, Joanne Galpin, and Joanne was my cousin in real life. So anyway, getting back to the movie, this whole next sequence of events is kind of slow in developing, but the bottom line is that the landlady advises Sweet Genevieve to return to her home and to see what her parents would advise at this point, since she hasn't been able to find work in Ypsilanti. Melvin Schumaker, as I said, was an entrepreneur in Frains Lake. He actually built a gas station there, which up until recent times still existed and was very popular. It had one of the first hydraulic lifts in the township. And not only that, but the price of gas there was considerably less than you'd find in most stations, and many people would drive out from Ann Arbor to patronize his gas station. And just as another aside, he later built a tavern and a dance hall, which became very popular. Well, meanwhile, back to the movie. The mail has been delivered, and this is Chester Martin, who in real life was Chester Martin. So apparently Melvin Schumaker liked that name and decided it was good enough for Hollywood just the way it was, or is. And so, but anyway, Chester Martin gets the letter. And this is an interesting sequence because this woman right here is my grandmother, Grandma Grace Conklin Patrick, whom I never knew. She died of a heart attack in the mid-40s, and unfortunately I never had the opportunity to know her, but this is very precious to me to see her, even though she's acting here in a movie, and I kind of get a flavor for what she was like. She has facial characteristics, or I should say my mother has facial characteristics like her, I guess that's the way it works. And in a moment we'll see my grandmother writing a letter to Sweet Genevieve and sealing the envelope just like my mother would do. And it's my dad that picked up on this, but after he pointed it out to me, I certainly noticed it too. So sometimes children inherit traits of their parents that you wouldn't normally think they would. But the way that Grandma Grace, in a moment here, makes this letter out to Sweet Genevieve, here she is, and when she seals it, she rubs the envelope several times over and over again, and that's something my mother would do. So anyway, getting back to the film again, she is writing to Sweet Genevieve and telling her that maybe it would be a good idea for you, there she is rubbing the envelope, a good idea for you to come back here to see what we can do to help you with your fortune. So, back in those days, in 1941, apparently the mail was much quicker than it is today, because the very next day, the landlady gets the mail, and here's the letter from Sweet Genevieve's parents. So, this is when the real excitement starts to begin, because as she reads, you know, they do want her to come home. And that's when the kind of the plot begins to develop upon her return home. Again, this in the editing, the filming, the production, the direction, the whole 9 yards were done by Melvin Schumaker. And for those of you that have ever attempted anything like this, especially with just one camera, you know that it is a lot of work to put one of these things together. And I applaud him. I'm not sure if it ever won an award. He did enter it into a contest. That was kind of the method to his madness in putting it together. I'm not sure if it ever won an award, but it certainly has lasted through the years. The film was kind of dormant for a while, and I first remember seeing it at the centennial of the Dixboro Church in 1958. I remember they put up a huge bed sheet in front of the church there at the foot of Short Street, and then up on a platform they had a projector, and they showed Sweet Genevieve that evening. And I think it was the first time that it had been shown, in public anyway, in a number of years. That would have been 58, and the film was made in 41, so it had been quite a void there for where the film was not shown. And then my father was able to obtain a copy of the film, if not the original, and have it transferred to a manageable form that you see here. Now, many of the subtitles, of course, are not in proportion to the screen, and some of them are at an angle, and I apologize for that, but when you take a motion picture and you convert it to a screen that's somewhat smaller than a movie screen, those are some of the things that result. Well, Mr. Martin decided that horsepower is the best way to go, and since his car wouldn't start, or he couldn't crank it to get it going, it's off to the train station to pick up Sweet Genevieve. And by the way, the train station, which we will see shortly, is the train station in Ypsilanti, down in Depot Town. Well, we're about ready to meet John Clark, not to be confused with Dick Clark of rock and roll fame. John Clark is, I guess you'd say, the hero of this particular movie. And as you can see, when he comes over there, he's very cordial. He's very gentlemanlike, very conversational, curious about why Mr. Martin is driving his horse and buggy. And Chester said, well, that darn old car wouldn't start. So I tried calling AAA, but this was before we had a phone, so it didn't work out too well. Anyway, he's on the way to the depot to pick up his daughter. So that's when the plot really begins to unfold. But it's rather slow in its development at this point. Well, here we are at the train station. This is in Depot Town in good old Ypsilanti. And they're waiting for the train to arrive. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but Schumaker is doing all the shooting here of the different scenes, and of course he had to time it so that a train was coming into the depot when he filmed this portion of the movie. And of course staged this as well with Sweet Genevieve and her daughter getting off the train with the assistance of the conductor. And they spot Grandpa Martin. Grandpa, I see you. And or she hasn't seen her grandfather yet, but oh, there now. Oh, Dad, it's me. Hi, Dad. And this is a great rendezvous. This is a part that Jim Campbell likes, with people hugging and embracing and being glad to see one another. Oh yes, yeah, there's something peaceful about that setting. Okay, well, they're back on the way home, and guess what? Those two guys are still working on building that fence, and work has not really progressed in the hour that has elapsed, but you know, this is a film. What do you expect? They're pretty much doing what they were doing when Martin went by to begin with. But Martin, again, a nice close-up, says, I want you to meet my daughter, Genevieve. And John Clark, as we'll learn later, is a widower and anxious, I suspect, to renew a female relationship. He takes his hat off, a very courteous thing to do. Genevieve seems a little bit aloof there, though. I don't know. But John is smitten, so much so that he falls over his partner there. I guess you can say he's in love, head over heels. Sorry, I just came up with that. Anyway, so then Genevieve learns that John lost his wife, and so maybe that piques her interest a little bit, who knows. So they are on their way back, and here comes this car driving down the middle of the road, no less. And this guy, George Brooks, the rich man's son, says, what do you want, the whole road? Get that darn horse and buggy off the road there, Buster. Well, this George Brooks in real life is my father. And I want to tell you something. My father in this movie is so atypical of what he was like in real life. I don't think I ever heard my father, in the 92 years that he lived, ever swear. I'm not kidding. This man never swore. Needless to say, it didn't succeed into the generation following his. But anyway, it gives you an idea of what kind of person he was. Well, here he is playing this role, of course, in the movie. I guess you could say somewhat of the villain, although he really hasn't done anything wrong yet. But anyway, he's trying to find out from John Clark, you know, who this chick is that's new in town, and it's Martin's daughter. And you can see the wheels are turning in George's head right now. And so, oh, by the way, how about a little old granddad? Yeah, hell yeah, well, it tastes pretty good, you know. I put it in the gas tank, too. Oh, another sweet. And again, probably my dad had more to drink in that scene than he did in his whole life. Anyway, here we come with my Grandma Grace, and a big embrace from Grandma Grace, and Sweet Genevieve is back home, and the granddaughter is with them, and it's just one big happy family. You know, let's face it. I mean, but you know, and I know, the movie can't end here. I mean, what kind of a movie would this be if it ended with a scene like that? No, we have to have some adventure. So, anyway, this is John Clark's home. Not sure where this is in real life, but John is being kidded by the hired man that he's saying, boy, the boss is in love with this Sweet Genevieve. I don't know. We're going to talk to this guy, you know. So, oh gosh, what happens next? Well, let's see. I have to recall, we have a box luncheon, box social, excuse me. We have a box social that's going to be coming up here shortly. And as you can imagine, when these boxed lunches are sold, that John Clark and George Brooks are the two people that really bid for these boxed lunches. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you'll see in a moment how much trouble develops from this boxed lunch social. Frains Lake, again, is on Plymouth Road. It would be just east of Dixboro, which Dixboro is just east of Ann Arbor, about 3 miles from US 23. So as you head out Plymouth Road, you'll go through the hamlet of Dixboro, and then just a few miles later is Frains Lake. And I'm told by people that have lived in that area for some time that there used to be a little bit of a rivalry between the people that lived in Frains Lake and the people that lived in Dixboro. So that might in part explain why these actors and actresses were pretty much unfamiliar with each other before the filming began. Well, it turns out that John Clark, not only is he handsome, good looking, and knows how to build fences, but he has a great voice, and he can sing very well. And Grandma says, "Don't you sing, you can't do that, Grandpa. Just listen to John." So, the granddaughter is asleep. I'm not sure what that shot shows, but anyway, John is going to start singing here shortly, and this is when you wish there were a soundtrack, because I'm sure John's voice was very beautiful, that's the term, to hear. And needless to say, he kind of sweeps Genevieve right off her feet. So now this is the side of the Dixboro store, which is still in Dixboro, right on Plymouth Road there, across from the one-room schoolhouse. And George is pushing his way in, very atypical again of my dad, because he wants to read about this box social that I spoke of earlier. Now the next scene is this woman right here who is kind of put off by this Brooks guy, and that's my mother. That was my mother that you saw there in a brief cameo. There's another brief cameo by Nettie Gibb. She and her husband owned the Dixboro store. So, but here you can see that it's a big square dance and box social, sponsored by the Ladies Aid, and it's going to be held at the Johnson Hall, which in actuality was the Superior Township Hall, which still stands. It has been moved to where the current Township Hall is located, and I think they've designated it a historic building. I hope they have, because it certainly would be. Well, anyway, George Brooks, he really likes to drive this car around. He's got a fetish about that, I think. But anyway, he wants to come to the door and find out if Genevieve is available to go to this box social, square dance, and whatever. But much to his dismay, he doesn't see Genevieve, but he does see the box lunch that is being prepared for the event. And Susie, it's ironic because Joanne, who in real life was my cousin, her sister's name was Susie, but she plays Susie in the movie. But anyway, she says, well, that's the box lunch, and you know, if you have enough money, you can probably buy it at the box social. Well, meanwhile, Sweet Genevieve has been in the back 40 doing whatever you did in the back 40. And George, of course, is bragging about the big fish he caught and a few other things that one brags about, the big farm he lives on. And surprised he hasn't offered her a ride in that car, but maybe that is coming. But he does pop the question. And George is about ready to get his own Dear John letter in a personal form. He says, sorry, John Clark has my hand tonight. And so this has not made George's day. I mean, you know, he's a little bit miffed about this. So he takes off in his car again, speeding and turning up the dust as he goes. And Let's see, what do we have next? I'm trying to remember here what happens next. This is another car that comes into play. Oh, this is John. I guess John is going over to just confirm with Sweet Genevieve that he, in fact, has her hand for the evening's festivities. No, he's picking her up. That's what he's doing. Huh, I think, yeah. He's picking her up for the box social. So here's the big dance. As I said, it was in the old Township Hall, and what we call the old Township Hall. Of course, it wasn't old then. And just a reminder, this is 1941 when this movie was made by Melvin Schumaker, an amateur photographer from Frains Lake in Superior Township of Washtenaw County, with a group of fairly unfamiliar amateur actors and actresses. And there are a lot of cameos in here, especially in this scene. All these people along the wall, if we were to go down the row slowly, I could pick out some of them. You know, I wasn't even alive when this was made, so I just know them from when I was growing up as to who they were, I should say. Anyway, so we got these box lunches that are going to go for top dollar, and you can guess that. And, you know, the first one is pretty popular. This is my grandfather on the left. The husband of my grandmother, who's also in the movie, as I pointed out earlier. Anyway, so the bidding starts on these box lunches. Now, having never been to one of these, I'm not sure how it works, but I suspect it's like anything else. Whoever has the most money to spend ends up with a box lunch. Well, you can rest assured that when Sweet Genevieve's lunch comes up for sale in a moment here, that there's going to be some fierce bidding between George Brooks, the bad guy, and John, the good guy. So George starts the bidding out at $1, and everybody's kind of impressed with that. But not to be outdone, John Clark says, hey, you know what? I built that fence the other day, and he gave me $2 for doing it, so I'm going to bid $2. So he ups the ante here. Down on the very bottom is one of my other cousins, Keith Galpin, who was just a young kid. You can see his curly hair there. What happens is that the bidding gets out of hand, at least according to John's dad. Not John's dad, George's dad, excuse me. And George is told by his father that he cannot spend any more money on this bidding. And so John Clark, again, scores a victory here by buying the box lunch. This is Delphine Phillips, and in real life, she did have a wonderful voice. She later became Delphine Hardy. They lived on Voorhees Road for many, many years, and it's too bad there isn't a soundtrack here because she did have a lovely voice in real life. Well, the box social includes a dance, and so all of a sudden, George sees his chance because Sweet Genevieve is sitting there like a wallflower, and he said, can I have this dance? Well, she agrees to that, and this George is pretty suave, as you can see. He's really tipping the night rather fancifully here. And so he gets a little bold, though, and he decides he's going to give Sweet Genevieve a little kiss on the cheek. And you can see he's not too discreet about it. Well, oh my goodness, that's insulting. No one kisses me on the cheek, least of all you, George. So John comes over and he says, what's the problem here? Well, George just gave me a little peck on the cheek. And George says, oh yeah, what are you going to do about it, John? And you can guess the next piece of action here, the old knuckle sandwich. There it is, right there. And well, George is driven not only to drink, but now he's smoking. And again, this is probably the only time my dad ever smoked in his whole life. You know, in this scene, believe it or not. Not only that, but he pulls out a gun out of his drawer, and we never had any guns around our house. So now he's got, not only is he smoking, but he's got a gun. This movie's getting, I hope he doesn't pick up any of these habits. Here's that car again. And here's the scene I hinted about earlier with George driving behind the wheel of a car, and Mr. Schumaker is stretched out on the hood of the car, taking this scene. I mean, the guy just went to the mat and putting this movie together. And again, I have to emphasize that all these shots, the close-ups, the distance shots, the ones that are taken from different angles, everything. You know, here he's leaving a little space between the two, which is a technique that's used in direction oftentimes to set dialogue. But anyway, getting back to the action, George has a gun. And, as with most guns, if you pull the trigger, a bullet comes out of the end of it. Now, he wouldn't dare shoot John. I hope not, but you guessed it. He gets too close, and George just stepped back. Don't come any closer. And the next thing you know, he pulled the trigger. And 30 seconds later, the bullet hits John. I mean, well, only in the movies, right? So, anyway, George is beside himself. You know, he just shot John. And the best thing he can do is to race away in his speeding car again. Well, the hired hand heard the shot, and he came over, and turns out John is surprisingly in pretty good health, even though he's just been shot at point-blank range. So, but again, only in the movies, I guess. But the hired man says, this is against most laws, especially those in Superior Township, and I'm going to call the sheriff. So, in the next scene, or very shortly, you see the hired man here runs off in his car, and he's going to get the sheriff to come over there and police this thing. And he also runs over and tells Sweet Genevieve that George Brooks has just shot John. So the word is getting around the neighborhood that George is not the kind of guy you want to get upset, especially if he's got his gun on him. So, you know, what are we going to do? Oh, I guess it's at this point they decide they're going to call the sheriff. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, and sheriff is, the next time the name appears, it is spelled correctly, I think. But, you know, again, this is an amateur film, produced, directed, edited, filmed by a pure amateur, and performed by the same. And the reason some of the subtitles aren't straight, or you can't read them in the movie, is because when this film was sized to appear on a smaller screen, that's some of the results that occur. Okay, well, you know what? He's gonna be okay. He got just a flesh wound, even though George pointed the gun straight at him and pulled the trigger. Now, this is at George Brooks' home. I'm not sure where this is. It's probably just a rural setting in and around Frains Lake or Dixboro. But George is about to be visited by the sheriff, and it isn't to buy or to sell tickets to him for the next patrolman's ball. He's there on business. And this is interesting because George's mother comes to the door, and eventually when George is taken away, she begins to cry, and as my dad recalled it, Mr. Schumaker, excuse me, peeled an onion under her nose. Here she is, that's George's mother, but you'll see shortly that she's in tears because they're hauling George off to the Huskow. And so in order to create the tears, Mr. Schumaker peeled an onion right under her nose. And it worked, because you'll see in a second that she is not a happy camper. But anyway, this is a very stretched out part of the movie that, you know, was pretty typical, I guess, of the film in its entirety. But now George sees he's getting out of there. He's going to go out the window, even though there's no ladder there. But anyway, he's apprehended before he can get away. And the next thing you know, my dad, my father, is put into handcuffs. Now, oh gosh, anyway. Yes, he'll be handcuffed and taken away. And now she starts to cry, and the way they caused that to happen was to peel the onion underneath her eyes, or under her nose, I guess. And he says, well, I guess I'm off to the jail. Let's go. So off he goes, and justice has been served. Now, one of the interesting parts of this movie comes up here shortly at the conclusion, because John Clark and Genevieve do marry each other. And Mr. Schumaker had clipped a wedding announcement out of the paper and has used it and uses it as a prop. And that's basically how he got the name of John Clark, is because he already had this nuptial announcement, and he was kind of working backwards, I guess you'd say. They'll show you that that announcement here shortly. Now, I think, I gotta remember, this was in a temporary cell that they either had in Superior Township. This was not the main jail for Washtenaw County. This was kind of a holding cell that they used. And now George opens up the paper, and here we go. This nuptial announcement that he's reading, which will appear on camera here shortly, does bring a smile to his face, but then you can see it's the Clark and Martin nuptials that are being told about there, and that's again how Schumaker came up with the names for his characters in this film. He had a ready-made wedding announcement. So George is starting to be more like my father now. He's starting to feel like, gee, I did something wrong, but I'm hoping that they'll forgive me for it, and I'm really sorry that I have done what I was able to do, and I'm so glad my son hasn't been born yet to see me behaving this way. So, who would have ever guessed? At this point, he would have never even imagined having a son, so I don't even know why I was even saying that. So, here's the big surprise, though. The sheriff and George Brooks, yes, they're coming to make amends. I mean, we have to have a movie that ends on a good note now. We can't have something that doesn't have, you know, somewhat of a happy ending. So here he comes. He is still has handcuffs on, which is hard for me to see my father in handcuffs, even if it's in a movie. But so anyway, there they are. They're the real handcuffs too, boy. And he's got something to say to you guys. He wants to say something to you. And it's not, you know, that he needs to borrow money or anything. He's going to say something to you about him being sorry that he ran up and down the road, made all sorts of dust with his car, and he shot John, and he kissed sweet Genevieve on the cheek. And this guy's got a lot to apologize for. But he wishes him all the happiness in the world. And they return the favor and say, you know, let bygones be bygones. And we'll see you next year at the Box Social. So, so off they go. And once again, we have a happy ending to Sweet Genevieve. We have to have a kiss in here, though, I think, because what kind of a melodrama would this be if there wasn't some sort of a kiss or an embrace? Come on. Oh, come on. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. That makes it official. And that's the end of Sweet Genevieve from 1941.